President Obama and the U.S. intelligence world were rocked this year by the leaks from Edward Snowden. Here's this week's front page of the Washington Post. Snowden was interviewed for hours by Barton Gellman, and he said that, quote, "The mission's already accomplished, I already won. But questions remain, including Snowden's plans for 2014. Snowden's key legal advisor in the United States, Ben Wisner, joins me now. Ben, good to have you here.
Glad to be here, David.
Welcome to Meet the Press. So the question is, what happens in 2014 legally? When he says, Mr. Snowden, I've already won, that may not be the view of the court. Just this past week, there was a ruling in the U.S. District Court by Judge William Pauley that concluded the following. No doubt the bulk telephony metadata collection program vacuums up information about virtually every telephone call to, from, or within the United States. That is by design, as it allows the NSA to detect relationships so attenuated and ephemeral they would otherwise escape notice. As the September 11th attacks demonstrate, the cost of missing such a thread could be horrific. The bulk telephony metadata collection program represents the government's counterpunch, connecting fragmented and fleeting communications to reconstruct and eliminate al-Qaeda's terror network. So here's a district court judge disagreeing with another district court judge. If it's going to go to the Supreme Court, the U.S. Court of Appeals has to do something. Is that where this is headed?
Well, it is, but let me just say, this district judge is not just disagreeing with another judge, he's also disagreeing with the president's own hand-picked advisory panel. That panel, which included a former top-level CIA official, a former counterterrorism advisor, concluded that they had seen no evidence that the bulk telephone metadata program had been uniquely successful, had stopped any kind of attack. So there is a dispute about whether this is effective or even legal. But yes, I think we always expected that there would be differences of opinion in the lower courts. There's no question that it's time for the Supreme Court to weigh in and to see whether, as we believe, the NSA allowed its technological capabilities to outpace democratic control.
One of Snowden's key claims is that this is an abusive program. This is an abuse of government authority. I can understand the argument that there is the potential for abuse by this kind of bulk collection. What is the actual abuse that's occurred?
Well, this is a general warrant. I mean, this is what the framers of the Constitution were worried about when they said that the government needed to have individualized suspicion before it collected records from the American people. What the NSA has done is they flip that on their head. They say, we're going to collect everything now because we can, and we think that it will be relevant to some investigation in the future.
But the Supreme Court said that that was okay. If you just, that your data between you call someone else, that just the data, not the content, that's not private.
You know, the Supreme Court said that was right about one person. The Supreme Court didn't say that that was right about all people. Remember, the NSA, that's exactly right. They're collecting the telephone records of every American. But I want to go back to that Washington Post headline where Mr. Snowden said, I won and mission accomplished. He didn't mean that the mission was accomplished. What he meant was that what he had set out to do was to bring the American public into the conversation, to bring open federal courts into the conversation, to bring the whole Congress into the conversation. He did his part. It's now up to the public and our institutional oversight to decide how to respond to these.
This is the ultimate act of civil disobedience. The question is, why doesn't he come back and face the music, face charges? Is that the honorable thing to do? Here's the president speaking in August of this year.
So the fact is that Mr. Snowden's been charged with 3 felonies. If in fact he believes that what he did was right, then like every American citizen, he can come here, appear before the court with a lawyer, and make his case.
Would he do that? Under what circumstances would he do it?
Here's the problem with that. The law under which Mr. Snowden is charged, the 1917 Espionage Act, a World War I era statute, doesn't distinguish between leaks to the press and the public interest, and I think that we can all agree that some of this information has been profoundly in the public interest, and someone who sells secrets to an enemy for personal profit. And in fact, the Department of Justice has argued in legal cases that it's actually a worse violation of the law to leak to the press than it is to sell it to an enemy, because all enemies get to see it. Well, that's true, but the American public also gets to see it, and in a democracy, it's very, very important.
But he took an oath not to disclose classified information.
That's not right. He took an oath to follow the Constitution. Now, he certainly signed the same standard classification agreement that everybody else signs, but his oath was to the Constitution. Now, if the law allowed him to make a public interest defense, if the law allowed him to come here and say, look at all the good this has done, if the law allowed him to say the government hasn't been able to prove any harm from these disclosures, sure, he would face trial in that kind of system. But for now, he doesn't believe, and I don't believe, that the cost of his act of conscience should be a life behind bars.
How often are you in touch with him, and how are you in touch with him?
We're in touch very regularly over encrypted channels.
Would he come back to the United States under any circumstances?
Sure, he would come back to the United States. He hopes to come back to the United States. I mean, he would like
Only
to.
if given some deal, some amnesty?
You know, amnesty is not a dirty word. There's a lot of people in this town, including some who have been on your show, who have been given amnesty. We just don't call it that. Lying to Congress is a crime. Torturing prisoners is a very serious crime. There are lots of times when people violate the law and society decides for one reason or another to look forward rather than backwards. I think that this is one of those cases. Mr. Snowden's disclosures have been profoundly valuable to the country and to the world. They've really changed the whole debate here. And I also think that there is much that the United States could gain through conversation with him.
I understand your point of view, and I wonder if you can understand those who believe that here is Mr. Snowden, who has great faith in the American Constitution, who is in exile in Russia, a country that does not have faith in our Constitution or in the freedoms that it affords.
Absolutely, and I actually think if there's one thing that we all should agree on, it's that Edward Snowden shouldn't be in Russia. The reason why he's in Russia is that the United States revoked his passport when he was transiting through there. And I hope that the U.S. will see that it's not in anybody's best interest for him to be there, and that even if he isn't going to return here, that there should be some other place where he can live.
He's a big public figure now. What can we expect from him in 2014?
You know, it's very possible that he will emerge a little bit. He's been called a narcissist in a lot of corners, but as you know, your network and every other has been trying to get interviews with him. People have been trying to give him money for book deals and movie deals, and he prefers to stay out of the limelight. But I do think we can expect to see him engage a little bit more in the public debate.
Certainly love to have him here at this table and talk about his views.